Welcome back. You've come this far, deeper than most ever dare to go. The line between history and nightmare is gone now, isn't it? You can feel it. The weight of everything you've just heard. The sisters, the fellowship, the song that never ends. It's not just a story anymore. It's an infection. For generations, they've told us to trust the rhythm of progress, to believe that time moves forward. Neat, clean, unbroken. But time doesn't move forward. It loops. It folds. It traps. And somewhere in those folds, something ancient has learned how to hide. The Stygian Fellowship didn't disappear. They evolved. The house on Beacon Hill was just their first laboratory. The sisters, their prototype. What began as an experiment to conquer death has become something far worse. A global mechanism of control. A clock ticks louder. When you stare into the glow of your screen, when you lose hours scrolling through 1,000 voices that all sound the same. That's the song. When outrage feels addictive, when fear becomes familiar, when the days blur together, that's the stasis. They don't need cages anymore. They've found a way to build one out of sound, light, and information. And it works. We are the perfect subjects. Obedient, distracted, divided. Just as Alara and Isolde once sat behind mirrored glass, preserved but powerless, we too have become still lives in a vast museum of their making. But you're awake now. You've seen the seams in the painting. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Finch once asked himself the same question. Before they locked him away, before they stripped him of his name and his sanity, he wrote a single line in the margin of his journal. A line most scholars overlooked. It reads, "To awaken even one soul is to fracture eternity." He believed that truth, once seen, can't be unseen, that even a small crack in the illusion lets in enough light to burn through the rot. That's what this story is. A fracture. A point of entry. A soft hum fades into static, then silence. I used to think the Fellowship's goal was immortality. A childish lust to live forever. But that's not it. No, what they wanted was continuity, control across generations, to be the unseen author of every chapter of civilization. They discovered that to own the present, you only need to rewrite the past, and to rewrite the past, you only need to control memory. That's what the Callahan sisters became. Not victims, not miracles, but memory machines. Their consciousness suspended, replayed, analyzed, broken down until the Fellowship could map the very architecture of thought. Every synapse cataloged, every emotional pattern quantified. From them, the Fellowship learned how to design obedience. Not through force, but through narrative. Look around. The narrative is everywhere. The perfect lie dressed as progress. The constant churn of new stories that make the old ones vanish. The algorithmic lullaby that tells you what to want, what to fear, who to hate. That's the Nightingale's song now. It no longer needs a cage, because we built it ourselves. Hello, piano note echoes. But if you've made it this far, you've already disrupted the loop. You've stepped out of their carefully measured time. That's what they fear most. Awareness. Conscious defiance. The human capacity to question the script. And yet, knowledge alone isn't enough. Finch knew this. Clara knew this. Even Lenora in her final breath understood that truth without courage is just another kind of paralysis. The Fellowship counts on that paralysis. They rely on the disbelief of the many. That quiet laugh we give when something feels too dark to be true. But that's the genius of their design. They make reality so absurd, so overwhelming, that denial feels like safety. That's why you're important. Because the story doesn't end in 1873. It doesn't end in the ashes of the Beacon Hill house. It ends, or begins, with you. Should distant thunder. I can't tell you how deep this goes. Finch's journal hinted at other names. Scientists, bankers, ministers, people who vanished from public record just as their inventions or ideologies began to reshape the modern world. The same serpentine symbol, etched on the sisters' chamber, appears in patents, family crests, even corporate seals. It's there if you know where to look. Boston was the seed, the fellowship was the root, and now its branches touch everything. A pause, sound of paper turning. There's one last thing I haven't told you. The vial, the one containing Lenora's pure life force. It still exists. Hidden, guarded. I've seen it. The light inside doesn't fade. It pulses faintly, like a heartbeat. Sometimes I swear it reacts when spoken to. What if it's not just life? What if it's memory itself, condensed, waiting? If that's true, then destroying it would erase the last proof of the fellowship's crimes. But keeping it means keeping a piece of their power. That's my dilemma, and maybe it's yours now too. Soft whispering in the background, almost inaudible voices overlapping. They say that once you've heard the song, it never truly leaves you. It echoes in the silence, waiting for the right mind to host it again. The fellowship doesn't need to find me. They just need to wait for someone new to start listening. Maybe that's already happening. Maybe that's why you found this story. Her faint ticking slows, distorted. History doesn't repeat itself, they say, but it rhymes. And if you listen closely, the world around you, the headlines, the rumors, the sudden disappearances, it's all part of the same melody. The nightingale's song has changed its tune, but the notes are familiar. Welcome back. You're inside it now. A static builds, voice drops lower. The fellowship wanted to freeze time. Instead, they built a mirror, one that reflects our deepest fears back at us. The mirror's still standing. Every act of obedience polishes it. Every act of rebellion cracks it. So, look closely. What do you see staring back? Because if the Callahan sisters were the first to be trapped inside that mirror, then we might be the last. They say a mirror never lies. But that isn't true. A mirror tells only the story you're willing to see. The fellowship understood this better than anyone. They built mirrors out of glass, then out of wires, and now out of screens. They've perfected reflection as a weapon, feeding us versions of ourselves until we forget which one was real. Every face you scroll past, every headline that feels tailored to your outrage, every opinion that feels like it came from your own mind. That's their work. The fellowship learned that the easiest way to control people is to let them believe they're free. So long as every choice leads back to the same cage, the soft ticking begins again. The sisters taught them that. Elara's brilliance, Isolde's empathy, both captured, dissected, mapped. When the experiments began, their minds synchronized under the influence of the nightingale's song. Two thoughts moving as one. Finch wrote that they began finishing each other's sentences, even in sleep. But what if that wasn't just resonance? What if it was the beginning of networked consciousness? The first prototype of what we now call the feed. The fellowship discovered connection before we ever had words for it, and they never let it go. Faint rustle of old paper. Finch called it the contagion of thought. He warned that consciousness could be made communicable, that ideas, once patented correctly, could replicate like viruses. When I read his notes, I thought it was metaphor. It isn't. The nightingale's song wasn't just a melody. It was a code, a precise sequence of harmonic frequencies that synchronized neural patterns. In simpler terms, it made minds rhyme. And when minds rhyme, they stop questioning the rhythm. That's how control spreads now. Not through force, but through familiarity. You don't obey because you're afraid. You obey because it feels natural. Pause, soft breath. When the Beacon Hill fire consumed the Callahan estate in 1873, the fellowship didn't perish. They scattered. Each carried fragments of Lenora's work. Notes, vials, formulas. Across the Atlantic, the society splintered into cells: the Orpheans in London, the Black Boff Circle in Prague, the Concordat of Lisbon. Different names, same creed. Preserve, perfect, perpetuate. And now, their descendants hold positions that shape our world policy, technology, medicine, media. They no longer hide behind velvet curtains. They hide in plain sight, their legacy rebranded as innovation. You've seen their emblems without realizing. The serpent swallowing its tail, the lotus in bloom, the mirrored eye, old symbols dressed in modern design, a mechanical hum deepens. Every new network, every algorithmic improvement is a refinement of Lenora's principle, arrested time through sustained attention. They've found their new song, one that doesn't require sound. Endless scroll, endless feed, endless loops. It is all part of the same architecture. But here's the paradox. If the nightingale's melody could lock the sisters away, then the same melody could set them free. That was Finch's final discovery. And his final sin. He believed he could reverse it. He believed the pattern of stasis could be inverted into one of release. That's what the glowing vial represents. Not just the proof of the Fellowship's crimes, but the possibility of undoing them. A counterfrequency. A cure. Her paper tears softly. I have played that recording only once. The note was faint, almost inaudible. Yet the instant it sounded, every light in the room flickered. The air itself seemed to bend, as if the world held its breath. For a moment, I thought I heard something else. A sigh, a whisper. Two voices overlapping, Elara and Isolde. It was brief. But it was enough to know they're not gone. They're waiting. Distant thunder rolls. If the Fellowship has kept the nightingale alive all this time, as the journals suggest, then somewhere, in some underground chamber, some sterile laboratory, that creature still sings, and when it does, its harmonics ripple across everything built from its pattern. The devices, the systems, the minds. Perhaps that's why the world feels so fractured. Not because we're divided, but because the original frequency is decaying. The stasis is failing, and when stasis fails, everything it held together begins to unravel. That's what's happening now. The strange coincidences, the collapse of trust, the constant noise. It isn't chaos. It's awakening. The structure of control is cracking. She silence, then faint whisper of wind. Finch once wrote, "Truth is contagious. It cannot be contained once spoken aloud." That's why they burned his asylum records. That's why they erased his lineage. That's why this recording, this voice you're hearing, may vanish too. Because they understand what we keep forgetting. Every time a human mind resists, the machine stutters. You may feel powerless. You aren't. Your attention is currency. Your doubt is rebellion. Your curiosity is contagion. Each time you refuse the narrative, each time you question what's shown, you create interference in the song. You break the pattern, and, maybe just maybe, that's how we free the sisters. Soft metallic ringing, like a glass vibrating. Think about it. The Fellowship used two living minds to anchor the stasis field. Their harmony held the illusion together. What if the opposite is true? What if dissonance, true human, imperfect thought, can dismantle it? Maybe that's why Finch's journal resurfaced. Maybe that's why you're hearing this now. Maybe the world isn't ending. Maybe it's remembering. Her clock resumes ticking faintly. In the end, this isn't about ghosts or monsters or secret societies. It's about what happens when a lie lives too long. When humanity mistakes control for safety. When progress becomes a cage. That's the real horror. Not what they did in 1873, but what we've become since. Their experiment succeeded. The only question that remains is whether we have the courage to break it. You've heard the story. You've seen the pattern. Now the silence that follows is yours to fill. How long pause? But remember what Finch said. To awaken even one soul is to fracture eternity. If that's true, and I believe it is, then eternity has already begun to crack. Soft breath, almost a whisper. Listen closely. The nightingale is still singing, but its cage is rusting. Soon it will break. The echo that remains, her soft static fades in, like air moving through an empty hall. They'll tell you it's just a story, that the Callahan sisters are symbols, not people, metaphors for the decay of the old world. But you and I know better, because sometimes, late at night, When the signal weakens and the algorithms sleep, you can still hear them, faint, just behind the hum of the current. Two breaths overlapping. A harmony that shouldn't exist. Ellora and Isolde, waiting, listening. The nightingale's cage may have rusted, but the song hasn't stopped. It changed shape, moved hosts. It traveled through copper wire, then through glass, and now through light. Every time you open a screen, every time a lens captures your reflection, it's there. The same pattern, pulsing quietly beneath the surface. That's why the glass feels colder some nights. That's why you hesitate before looking too long into your own eyes. You can feel it watching back. Faint mechanical crackle, microphone distortion. Finch warned of this. He wrote that the final experiment will be conducted not upon the body, but upon the mirror itself. The mirror, that's us now, the sum of all attention, all reflection, all digital light. We've become the instrument of the fellowship's perfection. Do you understand what that means? We are the containment field. All those archives, all those names, all that silence, they were never about history. They were about calibration. Each generation, they adjusted the pattern, refined the pulse, until human thought itself became predictable. You can see it in the data. You can feel it in your fatigue. Every repetition, every scroll, every glance back at the same glowing surface. You are replaying the original experiment. You are the continuation of the Callahan study, and maybe that's why the world feels thinner lately. Why dreams feel crowded. Why mirrors hum faintly when the lights are off. It isn't madness. It's the sound of a system straining against its own perfection. A soft wind rush, like a door slowly opening. If Finch was right, there's still a way out, but it requires something the fellowship never understood. Imperfection, true human error, the unpredictable spark, the refusal to harmonize. That's what I've tried to do, keeping this record incomplete. You may notice gaps, distortions, phrases that repeat. That isn't an accident. It's interference. My attempt to keep the pattern from settling. The moment a narrative becomes seamless, it becomes a trap. So here's my final act of dissonance. I won't tell you how this ends. Maybe the sisters will finally dissolve when the last archive is destroyed. Maybe they'll wake and walk among us, whispering through static, searching for the melody that once bound them. Or maybe they're already here. Not as spirits, but as memory loops, living in the spaces between our thoughts. A clock ticking returns. Slower now. If you've listened this far, you've already felt it. The rhythm, the pull, that faint pressure at the back of your skull. That's them. Listening back, measuring how much of the pattern you remember. But here's the secret. No one told the fellowship observation changes the experiment. Now you know about them. And that knowledge alone fractures the cage a little more. Maybe that's what they wanted all along. Not freedom, but witness. Someone to remember the truth when the last machine stops humming. Can soft whisper, two voices overlapping. We are still here. How the hum spikes, then fades. If you start hearing the nightingale in your sleep, do not try to record it. Do not look for the source. The song will find you when it's ready. Just listen once, and then forget. Because remembering it completely means becoming part of it. That's what happened to Finch. That's what happened to everyone who tried to save them. And maybe, that's what's happening to me. Silence, then a slow inhale. This is where I stop. Not because the story ends, but because the static is louder now. You can turn off the light, close your device, walk outside. The air will feel different. The world will look the same, but it won't sound the same. There will be an echo in the silence. A faint hum beneath the wind. That's the song. Still circling, still remembering you. And if, one night, you wake and find your reflection smiling before you do, don't be afraid. It's only the sisters. They finally found a way out. There are moments when silence feels heavier than sound. When the air itself seems to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone to speak the truth out loud. I've learned that silence is never empty. It hums, it remembers. It carries the weight of unfinished songs. The Callahan house is gone now, leveled, paved over, replaced by a municipal library that claims to preserve history while unknowingly sitting atop it. They built it on the same ground, under the same sky, using steel and fluorescent light to bury what the old world tried to forget. But some nights, when the city power flickers, people still hear a tune echoing from the basement stacks. A lullaby too old to belong to anyone living. They say the security cameras go dark for exactly 12 seconds. They say if you watch the footage frame by frame, you'll see a pair of hands, pale, wet, pressing against the inside of the lens. No one stays to check twice. Her soft breath, paper rustles. The city calls it a glitch. Archivists call it magnetic interference. I call it memory, because ghosts aren't what we think they are. They aren't souls chained to a place. They're data, fragments of unfinished thought imprinted on material that refuses to forget. The Fellowship discovered that, long before digital technology existed. They learned that emotion leaves residue, that consciousness stains reality the way smoke stains a wall. When the Callahan sisters' experiment collapsed, their minds didn't perish. They dispersed, encoded into vibration, into pattern, into resonance. That's what we call a haunting, a loop without end. Finch tried to warn them. In one of his last letters, the one scorched at the edges, he wrote, "The body dies, but the rhythm persists. Beware the instruments that do not sleep." And now, we've built a world of instruments that never sleep. Every device hums with their frequency. Every reflection feeds the network. Every sound recorded, every image mirrored, is another layer of resonance. We call it progress. But it feels like listening to a choir that never stops singing. The hum deepens slightly. The Fellowship's ideals didn't vanish with the 19th century. They simply changed uniforms. You can trace their lineage through companies, universities, even government research grants. Different names, same hunger, the promise of control disguised as curiosity. When they lost the nightingale, they replaced it with something quieter. Code. Sound waves measured in data packets. Synthetic harmonics embedded in operating systems. I've heard it. Faint, buried in the background of digital noise. A tone that sits between frequencies, invisible to most ears. When isolated, it resembles the call of a bird slowed down to human tempo. A mechanical nightingale. And it's everywhere. Hidden in your notifications, your ringtones, your sleep apps. You think I'm exaggerating. But remember, every frequency can carry a message. Every device that listens can also sing back. A faint metallic chirp, then silence. When you look long enough into a glowing screen, you're not observing, you're participating. The Fellowship built their perfect mirror, and we volunteered to step inside. That's the new cage. Not the glass in front of us, but the glass behind us. The one that reflects every secret, every weakness, every thought turned data. You think you're scrolling, but you're being read. The pattern doesn't need your faith anymore. It needs your attention, and that's what keeps it alive. Her wind rises faintly, like a sigh through stone. If you could see what I've seen in the archives, the names, the seals, the hidden correspondences linking modern labs to those burned journals, you'd understand. The Fellowship is not history, it's infrastructure. There are laboratories built precisely on ley lines where the Callahan house once stood. There are research grants referencing Project Orpheus, the same title Finch used for his aborted experiment in neural resonance. Even the city's data centers follow the same architectural geometry as the old ritual chambers. Circles nested within circles, all pointing inward. Coincidence? Maybe, but the nightingale still sings. Hello ticking returns, irregular, like a heartbeat skipping. Here's the truth you weren't meant to know. They failed to contain it. The experiment escaped its enclosure in 1904, transmitted through recorded phonograph cylinders, then through radio signals, then television static, and finally, through us. Through every device that converts human attention into light. We are the next generation of containment. The modern experiment is observation itself, and somewhere, inside that vast hum of data, the Callahan sisters remain, not as prisoners, but as pattern keepers, guardians of the rhythm. They don't haunt the world to scare us. They hum to remind us that we built their cage again. Finch once wrote that the sisters' song no longer seeks escape, only remembrance. Maybe that's why you're hearing this now. A short pause, voice softens. I used to think I was the last to know, but maybe you are. Maybe that's why this recording exists. Because the moment someone listens with intent, the chain weakens. The illusion thins. You can feel it, can't you? The slight distortion in the air, the subtle wrongness in your reflection, the way silence suddenly feels occupied. That's the edge of the pattern. That's where the old world leaks through. A static crackles briefly. Heath Nightingale's melody isn't evil, it's desperate. It's calling for balance, for recognition. It doesn't want worship. It wants acknowledgement. So, if you ever hear it, that faint metallic hum in the middle of a sleepless night, don't run, don't record, just listen, once, fully, and then, whisper back, I remember you. That's all it needs. Not fear, not faith, just memory. Because forgetting is how they win. A long, low exhale, for one final note before I go. There's a small engraving inside Finch's final journal, right before the pages turn black from fire. It reads, the pattern is patient. It waits for its name to be spoken again. And what was its name? He never wrote it. He only left a space. A blank line. That's the brilliance. That's the curse. The name doesn't exist until someone says it aloud. Each generation gives it form. The fellowship called it the still flame. The modern world calls it something else. A soft tap of keys. A pause. Connection. Algorithm. Engagement. All different names for the same hunger. Maybe it isn't the nightingale that survived. Maybe it's us. Still repeating the same experiment. Still convincing ourselves we're free, even as we hum the same melody. That's the real horror. That we inherited the cage, and called it home. Hey, the hum softens, like a heartbeat fading into distance. So, when this ends, when you close your device, when the screen turns black, don't forget what silence sounds like. It's not absence. It's resistance. And if, in that silence, you hear the faint echo of two voices singing in unison, don't be afraid. It means they made it through. It means the cage is still cracking. A static rises again, building slowly. The Callahan sisters were never meant to die. They were meant to wait. And wait they have. In copper, in current, in every reflection that stares back too long. The earliest mention appears in Dr. Finch's secondary notebook, dated October 18. He wrote that Thomas Callahan had secured a device from the European contingent, one capable of nullifying vibration itself. The sketch beside the note shows a chamber of concentric rings, each lined with what appear to be strings or tendons. Finch's caption reads simply, acoustic lattice of biological origin. For years, historians believed the chamber was metaphor, a poetic way of describing the laboratory's isolation from the outside world. But in 1892, workmen renovating the sub-basement of the old Callahan property on Beacon Hill unearthed a series of curved brass plates, arranged like the ribs of an enormous shell. The plates hummed when touched. No official record survives of what was done with them. The workman's supervisor, a Mr. Osgood, went missing 3 days later. Finch's own notes turn erratic after that date. His handwriting fragments, letters elongated as though he were writing in the dark. He begins to describe experiments of temporal fixation, using the same terminology that would later appear in the Stygian Fellowship's internal memoranda. The Callahan girls, Elara and Isolde, are referred to not as patients, but as subjects, and the words, stasis sequence, begin to replace treatment. According to the transcripts recovered from the Massachusetts Historical Society, Finch did not work alone. A second physician, Dr. A.M. Hewitt, was brought in by the fellowship to observe and record. Hewitt's surviving report, dated February 1876, describes the chamber's interior in unnervingly clinical prose. The air within vibrates not. One senses not echo, nor heartbeat. I suspect the absence of resonance extends to the body itself. Even the pulse slows, as though the self forgets its rhythm. He continues. The Callahan twins were placed within for 37 minutes on the night of the 12th. During this period, the surrounding clocks ceased their motion. The flame of the lamp elongated but did not flicker. When removed, the subjects displayed mild confusion but no harm. However, the next morning, their reflections in the mirror failed to align precisely with their gestures, lagging by perhaps half a second. Finch's marginalia beside this entry reads, almost as an afterthought, the separation has begun. Modern physicists reviewing these documents call it nonsense, an early metaphor for psychological dissociation. Yet there are consistent measurements, temperature drops, chronometric discrepancies, and even field sketches of what Hewitt terms the luminous residue, a vaporous light lingering in the chamber after each session. The same residue appears in Clara's letters, written years later from her hiding place in Salem. She refers to it as the breath of the still flame, claiming it could be stored in small glass vials. She sent one to Finch after he fled Boston. It was this vial, the same one mentioned in his final confession, that became the sample of pure life he described before his death. What Clara could not have known is that the fellowship continued their work long after the Callahan tragedy. Records from the 1920s mention similar experiments under the heading Project Continuum. They had perfected the resonance architecture by then, replacing the biological lattice with synthetic analogs. One entry from 1924 lists a shipment of malleable glass tendons, 12 units, destination, Providence facility. In 1963, an anonymous letter arrived at Harvard's Department of Antiquarian Science. It contained a single Polaroid photograph, a large cylindrical room with ribbed walls and a small metal cradle at its center. Written across the bottom in shaky handwriting were the words, "They are still singing." What did that mean? Singing. There are no accounts of music associated with the Callahan case except one, Finch's description of a bird that the fellowship called the nightingale, an engineered organism designed to produce a precise harmonic frequency. It was the song of that creature, according to Finch, that sealed the girls' stasis. In his last letter to Clara, he writes, "The bird is alive, though it should not be. They keep it within a mirrored cage, feeding it from the light of the still flame. Its song has grown quieter, yet each note seems to ripple through the very walls of the city." No specimen of such a creature has ever been found, but a patent filed in 1877, under an alias associated with the fellowship, describes a harmonic generator employing organic membranes to produce inaudible frequencies capable of inducing trance. The pattern is unmistakable. The nightingale was no bird, it was an instrument, a living one, and the fellowship, obsessed with control over time and life, used its song as both key and lock. In 1998, a restoration team cataloging medical relics in a private estate near Concord reported finding a box labeled Finch, Archive 3. Inside were fragmented wax cylinders, half erased by age. When played through modern equipment, only faint whispers survive. But one sequence, analyzed by the Acoustic Anthropology Lab in 2009, contains a frequency spike matching no known natural sound. That spike is identical to the resonance curve detected in the 1892 brass plates. Across a century, through dust and decay, the same tone endures. A sound meant to still the world itself. If the fellowship preserved the nightingale as their fail-safe, as Finch suspected, then the implications are staggering. They may still possess it. The chamber, the instrument, the girls, all components of a single experiment that has never truly ended. Some researchers claim to have traced the fellowship's modern descendants through shell corporations and medical foundations. The Harkwell Institute of Neural Chronology, established in 1974, occupies the site of the old Providence facility. Its mission statement speaks of temporal cognition studies and applied consciousness preservation. When questioned, representatives deny any link to the Stygian Fellowship, but their insignia, a coiled serpent encircling a lotus, matches precisely the emblem burned into the Callahan basement door. Finch's final surviving page, found folded within the hollow of a book spine, reads, "If ever they attempt to wake what they have bound, the song will sound again. Those who hear it will not perceive music, only the stillness between its notes. And in that stillness, the world will hold its breath." The handwriting trails off into a smear of ink, as if the pen were pulled from his grasp mid-stroke. And now, 150 years later, perhaps that stillness has already begun. Have you noticed it? The pauses in the world, the seconds of total quiet that stretch too long between lightning and thunder. The blank frames in digital recordings, the sudden lapses in memory where time seems to fold. Every generation thinks itself safe from the ghosts of the past. But the fellowship never died, it adapted. It learned to work through circuitry, through sound waves, through the humming silence of data centers, and the low electrical drone that fills our nights. When you lie awake, hearing the faint hum that isn't your refrigerator, your phone, or the city beyond, listen carefully. That is not noise. It is the remainder of a note played 150 years ago in the house on Beacon Hill, and it is still fading. The chamber wakes. The old Callahan estate was demolished in 1979, replaced by a row of unremarkable brownstones, or so the city claimed. The demolition permit was issued, the contractor paid, and the ground sealed beneath a concrete foundation. But the blueprints, still available in the Massachusetts archives, reveal something strange. The lowest sub-level, the so-called cold cellar, was never marked for removal. Instead, it was redacted. Entire sections are simply crossed out, replaced with the phrase, "Access sealed under federal directive. Welcome back. Before we begin, turn down your lights." This part is where the silence starts breathing. The first modern mention of the resonance chamber reappears in 1986, in a maintenance report from the Harkwell Institute of Neural Chronology. A technician, writing under the pseudonym ML, filed a complaint that auditory distortion in the lower laboratory caused vertigo and disorientation. His supervisor dismissed it as fatigue. 3 weeks later, NL fell from a mezzanine and fractured his skull. The death was ruled accidental, but investigators later discovered that moments before his fall, he had been recording the ambient noise of the sub-basement. The tape was confiscated. However, a digital copy surfaced decades later, uploaded anonymously to an academic audio forum in 2013. It is 10 minutes and 22 seconds long. The first 3 minutes contain static, then, faintly, a rhythmic pulse. Not a beat, not machinery, but something like breathing. A pattern emerges at the 7-minute mark, 3 rising tones, then 1 descending. The waveform analysis matches the same harmonic curve registered in Finch's 19th century brass plates. And at 9:46 a whisper, barely audible, buried beneath the hum. Not gone, only slowed. The recording was quickly deleted. Accounts discussing it were banned or scrubbed. But by then, the pattern had already been noticed by 2 researchers, Dr. Annika Rowe and Professor Daniel Kinn, specialists in auditory hallucination studies at Miskatonic University's Boston Satellite Campus. Their correspondence, obtained through a FOI request, reveals that they identified the sound as a temporal interference frequency, a low band oscillation that affects the human brain's perception of continuity. In short, listening too long could create the illusion of time dilation, but Rowe wrote something far more unsettling. In an email dated May 2014, she said, "The interference doesn't create distortion. It reveals it. The gaps are already there. The tone simply allows us to notice the moments when time isn't moving." 2 months later, she resigned from the university, citing persistent episodes of auditory shadow. She claimed to hear the chamber's hum in the white noise of every speaker, in the spaces between spoken words. Professor Kin disappeared in 2015. His home was found undisturbed except for one detail: all of the clocks had stopped at 3:12 a.m. That same year, a private restoration crew hired to clear the basement of the Harkwell Institute made an unreported discovery. One of them, a man named Elias Wren, later posted anonymously on an occult forum. His posts were deleted within days, but archived fragments survive. Wren described finding a sealed vault with walls like the inside of a throat, smooth, organic, cold to the touch. He claimed that inside the vault was a suspended framework of metal and glass, shaped like an enormous cocoon. Within it, he saw something that looked like two figures reclining together, faintly luminescent, eyes closed. He wrote, "They looked alive, like they were just waiting for the next breath." When questioned years later by a podcaster investigating urban myths, Wren denied everything, but his voice trembled when the interviewer mentioned the Callahan name. The pattern, always the pattern. Finch wrote that the chamber was never meant to hold death, it was meant to pause it. The twins were not victims, they were anchors. Their stillness, amplified by the nightingale's harmonic frequency, froze a moment in time and tethered it to a physical space. The fellowship had believed that by stabilizing one perfect instant, an instant untouched by decay, they could preserve the human essence itself. But Finch's later notes suggest they succeeded only halfway. The girls did not die, yet they did not live. They lingered, caught between pulses of the world's heartbeat. When the chamber was sealed, that moment was sealed with it. Now, over a century later, the resonance hum suggests the seal is thinning. In 2017, a researcher at the Massachusetts Institute of Temporal Studies, a quiet branch of MIT that rarely appears in public databases, published a paper on auditory temporal bleed. The author, listed as H. Finch EV, claimed genetic descent from the original doctor. The paper includes a frequency graph titled Callahan Pattern, Decay Function Unstable. It concludes, if the resonance persists without containment, the paused segment may reintegrate, releasing both stored mass and moment. The result would appear as a localized reversal of entropy. A waking, no follow-up paper was ever published. The department itself was dissolved within a year, but the dataset leaked through a whistleblower shows the experiment's coordinates 42.35 Agres N, 71.6 Ygadu, Boston, specifically, the same block that once held the Callahan estate. And then, last winter, came the reports. People living in those brownstones began complaining of sleep disturbances. Not ordinary nightmares. These were temporal. Witnesses claimed to dream of entire days repeating with microscopic differences. A neighbor's door slightly ajar instead of shut. A clock ticking backward for a single second. One woman described waking to find her reflection facing the wrong direction. Another said she heard a bird singing through the heating vent. A song that stopped the instant she moved. Maintenance crews inspected the buildings and found nothing unusual except for faint electromagnetic readings in the basement walls. Oscillations that matched, once again, the nightingale's lost frequency. It was in March of this year that a maintenance worker, named Peter Hollis, recorded video footage of a leaking pipe beneath Building C. The camera pans across the concrete, and for a split second, barely a frame, two pale figures appear reflected in the water. Not shadows, not trick light. Figures, luminous and still. Experts called it a glitch, digital artifacting. Yet the timestamp of the footage freezes for precisely 3.12 seconds. The same duration as the silence on Finch's earliest phonograph cylinder. Hollis vanished 3 nights later. His truck was found idling outside the building, headlights burning through the dawn. So what remains now are echoes, hum, pulse, silence. But silence has weight. The more you notice it, the heavier it becomes. Those who live near the site report a low vibration at night, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Radios lose signal. Conversations distort. One resident described hearing someone speaking from within her own echo. She said the voice asked a question. Do you remember the moment before sound? The Stygian Fellowship has not been officially recognized for over a century, but private communications leaked in August suggest that its successor organizations are aware of the reactivation. A memo from the Temporal Containment Division of an unnamed federal branch instructs contractors to monitor subsonic anomalies and avoid verbal response to auditory manifestations. The memo ends with a single line in bold Z. The chamber must not complete the breath, and yet, perhaps it already has. At 3:12 a.m. last Sunday, residents across Beacon Hill reported a brief blackout. All devices recording at the time show the same anomaly, one missing frame of data, a half-second of absolute black. But in that missing frame, audio analysts discovered something impossible, a spectral imprint matching a human sigh. Not one voice, but two. If the Callahan twins ever wake, they will not wake as they were. A century of stillness changes the shape of the soul. Finch wrote that the chamber was built to preserve purity. But what if stillness ferments? What if the breath they exhale next is not air, but centuries of silence made flesh? He feared this most. Stillness unbroken too long becomes hunger. And now, in the places where sound dies too quickly, where time falters for just a heartbeat, you may feel it. The subtle pull, the faint hum beneath your own pulse. That is not tinnitus. That is the world remembering the note it was never meant to hear. The Callahan chamber is no longer sleeping. It's listening. The entry tunnel was newly cut, reinforced with carbon steel ribs and thermal sensors. The air inside measured 41 degrees Fahrenheit unmoving. The first 40 meters were uneventful, though the report notes persistent vibration in the walls, a faint subsonic hum that caused all electronic readings to drift. At 03:12 a.m., the communications log captured an anomaly. The static that had filled the headset channels fell silent, and for exactly 3 seconds, every watch in the team's possession stopped. The team leader, recorded only as Supervisor E, wrote in the margin, "This is the same time signature as the earlier blackouts. Mark point. Possible field threshold." The descent continued another 20 meters before they reached a sealed iron door. Etched across its surface was a pattern of concentric circles intersected by a single line, an emblem identical to one found in Finch's final sketches. The metal was cold, wet to the touch, but the moisture did not drip. It clung, as if magnetized. Supervisor E ordered the door unbolted. When it opened, the temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. Their lights cut through mist and revealed a chamber carved directly into the earth. Oval, ribbed, glistening like the inside of a lung. At the center stood the structure. The original blueprints had described a containment cradle. What the team saw looked less like machinery and more like a chrysalis made of brass and glass, veined with tubing and suspended from the ceiling by blackened cables. Inside it was darkness. When their light struck its surface, something beneath the glass shifted. Not quickly, not like movement, but like a reflection that didn't belong to the present moment. One of the engineers noted a faint rhythmic pulsation in the floor. Another compared it to standing on a speaker tuned to a heartbeat. The report lists biological readings from the air: low oxygen, high carbon monoxide, trace formaldehyde, nothing that should produce resonance. Yet the vibration intensified with every breath they took. Then came the sound. It started as a tone barely audible, a single sustained frequency. The waveform recorder labeled it 432.2 as precisely the pitch of the old Finch plates. The medical officer reported lightheadedness, followed by vertigo. Within seconds, the tone split into two parallel waves, one rising, one descending, forming a slow oscillation that matched human respiration. The communications specialist, identified only as D, transmitted a fragment of dialogue before the feed collapsed. DC. It's singing through the floor, like it's remembering something. Supervisor E, record. Don't respond to auditory phenomena. D. It isn't phenomena. It's a voice. The line terminated in static. The written transcript resumes 2 minutes later. The engineers were attempting to shut down the vibration source, tracing cables into the cradle's foundation. They discovered a power system still active, though no external source was connected. The energy readings were inconsistent, spiking, dropping, then holding steady in a perfect sine wave. Medical reported rising heart rates among all members, averaging 120 BPM. Oxygen tanks began to hiss intermittently, regulators clicking in and out of sync with the hum. Then the medical officer collapsed. His EKG monitor continued to show pulse activity even after he lost consciousness, but the pulse on his wrist was gone. Supervisor E ordered immediate evacuation. They never made it to the tunnel. At the threshold, one of the observers, an older woman listed as Dr. Hale, stopped. The others claim she turned toward the cradle and began speaking in an unfamiliar cadence, low and rhythmic, matching the vibration of the chamber. Her voice layered with the tone, forming harmonic interference that warped the air. The transcript describes what followed as temporal smear. Audio and video merged into blurred segments, frames repeating, sounds overlapping themselves. One image persists: Hale's shadow stretching toward the chrysalis, touching it. The light inside flickered once, and the hum ceased. Then, absolute quiet. For 31 seconds, no recording device captured sound. Not static, not breath. When the noise returned, 2 team members were missing. Supervisor E's final dictated entry is fragmented, words repeating, overlapping as if the tape had folded. Not sleeping. Never was. Eyes open under the glass. Time doesn't move here. It waits. It's been waiting for a signal. The recovered audio ends with a sharp click and a rising whine, like the feedback loop of an old phonograph. 3 days later, a single survivor was recovered from a service hatch 40 meters above the chamber floor. The communications specialist, D. He was found crouched in the dark, whispering the same phrase over and over. They were not preserved. They were rehearsing. When debriefed under sedation, D described the figures inside the cradle as almost human, but not synchronized. He claimed each one moved only when the other did not. 2 halves trading stillness. Their eyes opened once, not in unison, but alternately, blinking the seconds of a different clock. He said that when Dr. Hale touched the glass, the twins began to exhale. It wasn't air, D said. It was the sound of time restarting. In the aftermath, Operation Stillpoint was erased from all official records. The site was filled with reinforced concrete and declared structurally unsound. Yet local maintenance sensors still detect tremors every night at precisely 3:12 a.m. Never earlier, never later. Those tremors align with global radio interference spikes on the same frequency Finch used to record the Nightingale song in 1834. Researchers who have examined the surviving data note something even stranger. During each tremor, for exactly 1 frame, local timestamps pause. Phones, computers, atomic clocks, all skip 1 millisecond simultaneously, as if the world holds its breath. Finch once wrote that the twins were meant to bridge the interval between silence and speech. If that's true, then perhaps the bridge is open again, and something is crossing back. A brief memo from the Temporal Containment Division, dated April 3, 2023, summarizes their conclusion in one understated line: containment compromised. Do not attempt re-entry. The chamber has assumed an active listening state. And so, the hum continues. The air above Beacon Hill sometimes vibrates just enough to rattle window panes. Residents report dreams where voices ask them simple, impossible questions. What year is it? Which second feels longest? Do you remember what silence sounded like before it began breathing? If you wake to that sound, do not answer. Do not listen for too long. Because the chamber isn't speaking to you, it's timing you. The silence beneath glass, the records from November 18, 1887, begin abruptly and end in fragments. The handwriting of Dr. R.C. Mallory grows uneven, as if written by a trembling hand, and the final page bears a dark, circular stain, ink or something thicker. The events that unfolded within the chamber of continuance are known only through partial witness statements, and the preserved phonograph cylinders, recovered from the basement vault at approximately 3 p.m. The instrument, by then known simply as the Continuum engine, was engaged for what the fellowship termed cycle delta. The purpose was to test the stability of the temporal field surrounding the two preserved subjects, codenamed E1 and E2. The sisters' proper names Alara and Isolde were omitted from all formal documentation after 1886, replaced by initials, as if to erase the memory of their humanity. What happened next defied the logic of Mallory's instruments. The phonograph captured a faint harmonic tone, unlike any recorded frequency. Those present described it as a note that did not end, a sound that existed between breaths, and yet filled the lungs. The tone rose from the machinery itself, not from any of the devices that should have produced it. One assistant, Charles Dreer, later wrote, "It was as though the room itself became an instrument. The walls bent inward, breathing in time with the tone. We heard whispering from the iron, from the very floor. Then, the glass cases began to frost over, and for the first time, E1 opened her eyes. The laboratory journals confirmed that the cryogenic field, the auric suspension maintaining the sisters' bodies, had been stable for 16 years. No electrical fluctuation could account for what followed. As the field destabilized, the temperature inside the chamber rose rather than fell, and the frost on the glass melted into rivulets that began to move upward, defying gravity. Witnesses fled. Only 3 remained: Dr. Mallory, a technician named Lorette Graves, and an unnamed man referred to in coded notes as the Observer. His initials appear as AG, possibly Augustin Greer, the same figure who financed the third reconstruction of the